and welcome to our webinar on policy principles for prosumers, which will look at what final NECPs should contain regarding energy communities and the rights of energy citizens. Here you can see what we will talk about today, and in a minute I will give the floor to Christian Patrick from EcoUnion.
They have a minor share in there. Oh, now I hear something. Oh, now something is happening. So apparently I hear some audio. Okay, I will continue. So here we have the overview of the 5 principles that we put in place, or that we want to propose. The first one is setting ambitious targets. I will explain each one a little bit more in detail in the coming slides, but just to give this overview. So one is setting ambitious targets, then ensuring the economic viability through favorable framework conditions. That means that prosumers have to have a business case for becoming prosumers. The next one is fostering renewable energy communities, because without energy communities, prosumers won't have the impact that they can have. And then basically supporting these 3 points, or these 3 principles, are 2 other ones. One is establishing energy responsibility and coherence at all levels. All levels means from the municipal to the national or European level. And the last but not least, the principle on ensuring prosumer representation in governance processes, because that is an issue which has to be addressed as well. Effective. So we start with the first target, the first principle, which is about targets. We propose to set at least 2 targets, and 2 ambitious targets. The first one would be a target on rooftop PV. We chose rooftop PV because basically all rooftop PV targets in future will, or installations will have some kind of involvement of the people that live in the building, or that who are the owners of the building. It can also be companies. Because PV on the rooftops is very close to the consumer. And that also means that potentially all future rooftop PV installations will have some kind of self-consumption involved in there. So if someone decides to put PV panels on the roof, that means they are already kind of actively involved in the energy transition. I will explain on the next slide of what we think the target should be for this rooftop PV. And then a second target would be on energy communities. So there should be a target on saying which should be the projects, or the share of projects where energy communities are involved. And as you can see on the slide, there's an overlap, because there can be rooftop PV installations which are initiated by energy communities, for example, on schools or larger buildings, or when you have a building with several tenants where the energy is self-consumed by the tenants themselves. So there's an overlap, and that's why you probably can't add these 2 targets, one plus the other. But in the implementation, one has to see then where potentially this overlap is. But this is not the main issue, or not a major issue, we think, because important is to have these targets established. So for rooftop PV, we propose to use the rooftop potential as major guide on how high the target has to be. And there was a recent report or study from the JRC, so a European Commission research institution, which calculated the rooftop potentials in quite a detail for all the European countries, all the countries in the EU. You can see here the gigawatt hours per year, which they came up with, also showing at which level of the LCOE these installations would be viable for all the different countries. And by translating the gigawatt values very roughly into a gigawatt value, the gigawatt hours into a gigawatt value, there is a overall rooftop potential, technical rooftop potential of some 680 gigawatts in the EU. And we think, to be really ambitious, 50% of that rooftop potential should be a target for 2030. That means 340 gigawatts across all European countries. So for a country like Spain, that would mean some 32 gigawatt it was. And for a country like Germany, it's about 50 gigawatts. Considering that Germany has so far deployed close to 50 gigawatts, it basically means that 50 gigawatts on rooftops alone should be reached by 2030. This is indeed quite ambitious, but if these targets are reached, it will really show that energy communities and prosumers are getting a foothold in this energy system. And the additional advantage again of rooftop PV is that you don't need the use of natural spaces. You basically use the built environment to put energy generation installations, which has also environmental benefits. For the energy communities, there can be there are several ideas of how these targets could look like. There can be also several ones, but at least one of these proposals should be taken on by any member state. So it could be that, for example, energy communities should have a share of the total national renewable energy target of, let's say, 30 or 50%. That means that installations, larger installations, should have always energy communities involved in them. Or it could be another target where it would be measured how many households are members of an energy community, and that could be, for example, 5% by 2030. Just to give an idea of taking the numbers from RISCOOP, currently there are only 0.4% of the households that are participating in energy communities or part of a cooperative. So kind of 10 times that number by 2030 would be a good idea. This is also proposed that countries measure the number of renewable energy communities, which also means that we come later to that they have to define what an energy community really is, or the number of the members of renewable energy communities, and potentially also the number of jointly acting renewable self-consumption activities, which also includes the measuring or at least estimating how much energy is self-consumed by energy communities. So, yeah, there are 5 ideas of targets. Important is that countries find a way to track what is happening with regards to energy communities in their respective countries. Because at the moment, this is not really happening. That is not very transparent. To reach these targets, it may be appropriate or necessary to put in place some kind of obligations that requires energy communities to participate in renewable energy projects, which can also have positive effects, especially when it comes to public acceptance, when, for example, wind parks or solar parks are built close to municipalities, and having them being involved in the projects will definitely help to get these projects implemented. The second principle is about the economic viability. No one will become a prosumer if if they lose money with that. So it's important to ensure that any project that prosumers are involved in are viable. So it's not making a huge amount of profits, but to making at least sure that there's a payback time for the invested money that is given for these installations. So the first thing is that shared self-consumption has to be facilitated, because the more you can self-consume and share excess energy with neighbors or with other people, the better, the faster the payback time is, given that retail prices in many countries are now higher than the LCE of PV installations, for example. Then, if shared self-consumption is not possible, there should be a fair remuneration for excess electricity, which, should be at least the wholesale market price, but ideally a little bit higher, because there are no transmission costs, or basically they can, as the energy is usually produced within the distribution grid, the value is higher than what is actually the value of electricity which is coming through the transmission grid still. So that's why the remuneration for excess electricity should ideally be a little bit higher than the wholesale market price. Next one is conducive to rate design, which means that it's important that the variable part of the tariffs is high enough to make a business case for self-consumption. If the variable part is rather low and people have to have a high fixed part of their invoice, then for them it doesn't really make sense to save energy, which is bad for the energy efficiency targets, but it's also not really helping them to say we want to install a PV installation, for example, because we can save costs on the variable part of the kilowatt hours. So the rate design is key. And for example, in Spain, we have already very high fixed tariffs, and there are discussions that basically all invoices should be almost fixed, and the price per kilowatt hour of the price per kilowatt hour would be rather low, and just by being connected to the grid, you would have to pay the majority of the invoice, and that wouldn't really help to foster self-consumption and renewable installations. And then a simple taxation mechanism means that the sharing of energy shouldn't be made complicated by putting additional taxes. As long as people don't really make a business out of it, it shouldn't be too complicated to share energy with neighbors. Simple declaration. The tax statement may be sufficient, or it may be taken out of the taxation in total. And then there are a number of other points which are important for renewables in general. So the guarantee of open, transparent, and priority grid access. That means that there shouldn't be any barriers to get connected to the grid. The facilitation of sector coupling is also important, so that people start using electricity for heat pumps, for example, and that they can get gas or oil heating systems substituted by heat pumps. Provision of grid services that they can aggregate anytime they can support the grid, their services, and then potentially get some income on that. And long-term contracts, power purchase agreements, or green sustainable public procurement programs will also facilitate the introduction of prosumers. The third principle is about how to foster renewable energy communities. And the first task that member countries have to do is basically defining the national forms of energy communities, so defining which kind of legal entities can be energy communities, or should there be new ones. It can be cooperatives, but there may be special provisions that are only valid for either renewable energy communities or citizen energy communities. So that needs to be defined so that there are no that there's no ambiguity between about what an energy community actually is. Member states should also conduct transparent cost-benefit analysis. Either that should already have been done and be available in the NECPs, or they should show when and how they will do that. And then this is important to see where can energy communities help to save costs and to improve social well-being, and where there may be technical issues which have to be addressed specifically. But this should be very transparent, and it must be ensured that in the end, energy community, or the right to prosume would not be touched. Then removing administrative, technical, financial, and legal barriers by, for example, creating single point contact points. These are the typical recommendations that always have to be given for renewables, so that's basically not new. But these processes have to be adapted to energy communities because they were not, or in many countries, they're not real big players at the moment. And legislation should also consider the energy poor and marginalized households, and provide education and awareness raising about energy issues so that people better understand what their role will be in the future energy system. For the fourth principle, I would like to do a short introduction in the sense that you understand what energy autonomous cells or energy autonomous units mean, which basically are the core of understanding how renewable energies will work in future. And that will lead then also to why energy responsibility at all levels is required. So I just quickly go through these slides showing energy autonomous cells, the concept of that. So you can start with a very small device, which can be a solar-powered phone or laptop or a solar calculator. So a small device that uses renewable energy and provides all the services that you need. But this is not possible for all appliances. For example, washing machines or motors, they need more energy, which can't be just provided by a small solar module. So you need, for example, PV, solar thermal heat pumps, or other renewable energy installations to create the next bigger energy unit, which would be a home or a building. So more or less energy self-sufficient unit wherever that is possible. And for example, the directives for net zero energy buildings is going into the direction to create these kind of buildings that are more or less energy self-sufficient. But this is not possible for all buildings or also vehicles, large installations, or larger buildings. So they would need renewable energy coming from other sources, small hydro, biomass plants, solar parks, wind power, to create basically villages and municipalities that are more or less self-sufficient. And you see that there are also arrows between these larger units to the smaller ones, because there will be still a grid to connect everybody who's in there. And then for larger cities and industries, you need even more wind parks or solar plants or offshore installations to provide the energy for these large demand centers. But basically, this will lead to countries trying to be more or less self-sustainable and trying to at least get into that direction. And then at one stage, they also have to trade energy and then make sure that they're not trying to be completely autark, but they should, with the targets that are being set, be more or less in balance, be able to provide all the energy that they need. And the renewable energy potential show that this is possible. So if all the countries do that, then Europe would also become renewable in the long run, and hopefully by 2050 at the latest. So what this picture shows is that there are a lot of different levels where energy decisions have to be taken. And that explains with fourth principles, establishing energy responsibility and coherence at all levels, because distributed energy leads to distributed responsibilities. And this should be reflected in future legislation, that all the political levels, the local, regional, national actors, they all have to become energy accountable. They have to make their own plans. Every community and even every household has to say, okay, how do I contribute to this future vision to have a renewable energy based society. And to do that, it has to be coherent with other legislative frameworks, which are at the moment not really considering energy, but building codes. Building codes think about a lot about energy already, but public spatial planning it can be improved. The orientation of buildings, of how our society should work. There needs to be a lot to be adapted in other frameworks, and the PROSEU project showed that in another report that you can find on our website on how different legislative frameworks should take prosumerism into consideration in order to allow this vision to become reality. And the responsibility also includes that environmental, social, and economic factors are taken into consideration to be truly sustainable. Also here we have written papers which you can find on our website. The last point is about prosumer participation in governance processes. At the moment, it is not really clear who will actually represent prosumers and energy communities in national processes or in also on local levels. So there are a number of candidates, let's say, associations of renewable energy suppliers, cooperatives, potentially energy agencies, NGOs, trade unions. They all can speak on behalf of energy communities, also individual prosumers, but this is not really established yet. And then this has to evolve so that if there's an energy dialogue on whatever level it will be, local or national or European level, there needs to be representation of prosumers. So it's important to define these actors and to make sure that they really speak on behalf of at least the majority of the prosumers and in their interest. And then it also needs to be defined where they can participate. For example, in target setting on the EU and national level, when it's about targets, not only the big utilities should be in there and regulators and governments, but also, again, representatives of prosumers. Or if it goes about renewable energy policies or support schemes, these are topics where they should be involved. On the local level, it's about setting local targets. Urban planning is very important because only if the new areas are built in a way that the buildings that are then put there can actually capture renewable energy resources, then it will be possible to create these net zero energy buildings. Also, local ordinances, administrative processes, these are, when they are being set up, there should be a consultation of prosumer representatives. And since most of those energy communities or individual prosumers don't really have the time and money to go for that, it's important that governments encourage and seek the input actively of these representatives. So these were the 5 targets or the 5 principles. In the paper, you will find some more detailed recommendations and ideas. We propose and hope that you and other people will still use the time until the final NECPs are being published to influence policymakers to get these parts of these principles into the NECPs, but then actively work on influencing the transposition process of the directives that I mentioned at the beginning, especially the Renewable Energy Directive and the Electricity Market Directive, into the national policies or into the national legislation, where we still have more time until they have to be transposed. But there is, this is where we can hopefully have some possibilities to influence and to get some of these principles implemented. And with that, I would like to close. So keep the vision in mind, and 100% renewable Europe is possible at the latest by 2050, and we hope a little bit earlier even. Thank you very much. And now I don't know if that works with the system. If you can hear me, or no, sorry, if you can pose questions. If you have any questions right now, content-wise, then I would answer those. Otherwise, I would hand over to Verle. So I can't. At the moment, I don't hear anything yet. So maybe Anja, if you can say or if now the.
Yeah, there's nothing in the chat on the question and answer. But people can type their questions also in the question and answer if they want to.
Okay, thanks. Can people also?
And if not, yeah, then we can continue and maybe ask questions afterwards.
Okay, so it's not possible.
There's a question. There's a question. I'll send it. I'll send it to you.
Okay, yeah, I can.
I know you've seen it.
Yeah. I would like to point out something that refers to the process of the NECPs and the role of consumers, referring to Greece. Can you unmute Dimitris, or that's not possible, Anja?
Unmute Dimitri. Yes, I can, I think. Just a second. No, I can't. Sorry.
Yeah, he also said that he can't unmute. So.
Can make him a panelist, that's all. Then he can talk to us.
Yeah, if you can make him a panelist, yeah.
I can mute him. No, I make him a panelist and he can talk to us.
Okay, so Dimitri,
now you can speak.
If it works.
Dimitri. Or just answer his question.
Yeah, no, it's not really a question because he wanted to make.
But Dimitri, you should be able to talk to us. I made you a panelist, but we can't hear you.
Dimitri, can you check again if you can unmute yourself? Seems to be an issue.
Now I see it.
I think you can hear me.
Now it works.
Yeah,
yes,
now it
works. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Please.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I found it very, very interesting. Very, very briefly, 1 minute, one comment. 2018, we have a new law about energy communities. I had the pleasure of kind of designing it also because I've been working in the. Now I work for WWF in Greece, but I have been designing it, the framework for the energy communities in Greece. So this one has been, let's say, largely voted by almost all parties in the parliament. So it was part of the. It referred in the previous National Energy and Climate that the role of the energy communities would be increased as years go by until 2030, and it was also quantified in terms of referring to the energy communities being part of projects, renewable projects of 500 megawatts. At the moment, we have during the change with the new government, we have a new, more ambitious national energy and climate plan. At the same time, it restricts the energy communities in this in that aspect. So basically, there's not anymore this quantification of 500 megawatts. Plus, in the 310-page document that is being now, it is under public consultation at the moment. It is only being mentioned 4 times, while all the, let's say, effort is being given to very, very fast-track and big renewable projects. So from that aspect seen, I think there is a kind of differentiation in the role of the energy communities. I have to say that they have been created a lot massively during the one and a half year of existence. Everything that you have actually presented is part of that law. It's extremely flexible, and I think, and now I would like also to propose at some point, I would like also to inform whoever might be interested about this framework. So that could be something, because I know that other countries are trying to also create those kind of efforts but not only for the self-consumption. It refers to all kinds of energy activities. And since it has been created in 2018, it was, let's say, written before those directives have been recasted. So that is also a matter of maybe some things need to be adjusted at the moment with the new directives and so on. But that was at the time the idea. So at some point, or that could be something, a presentation that I could, let's say, send to everybody, or kind of a policy paper or something like that. I think it could be interesting also to have from different countries something like that. So, but the trend at the moment is an effort to kind of restrict this tool, let's say.
Okay, thanks very much for that contribution. Well, indeed, Greece seems to be one always the key country right now, which has made a very good draft of the NECP and also considers energy communities in a good sense. So hopefully all the work that you have done won't be taken out now by the new government. But yeah, we would be happy to receive if you have something to share, good practices, and then we can distribute that within the community. We have set up a community of prosumer interested people on our website, and then we could distribute it there. I would say that we now have the presentation from Verle, and then we will have short discussions at the end if there's time. So can we, Anja, can you give the presentation to Verle? We can hear her.
Yes, Verle can now manage her presentation. On the left, there are those arrows. You can flip through it.
We can't hear you, Verle.
Yeah. Lost you.
Verle, did you click this audio connection button? It's Seems that you're not muted, but we don't hear you.
Yeah, we don't see the.
For some reason, unfortunately, we can't hear.
Yeah.
Can you describe the button? There.
If you click on more options, you have a link to audio connection there, and maybe there you can change it.
This black button with the 3 dots.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
And then there's one audio connection.
And maybe there you can change something. Otherwise, now I see you.
Okay. Yeah, I hear it. Sorry. Thank you. Hello, everybody. I will be short. We just also wanted to give you a quick overview of where we are with the NECPs. So for people, Christian already referred to it, the NECPs are the National Energy and Climate Plans. And so member states need to take up in these plans the policies and measures with regards to climate and energy for the next coming 10 years. Member states already had to submit a draft plan by the end of last year, and now they need to finalize their plans and submit their final plan by the end of this year. So we still have a little bit of time to try and influence the national energy and climate plans, and that is why we still try to inform people where we are and what still needs to be done. So we already published a report before summer where we did, in fact, together with many of our member organizations, where we did an analysis of 24 of the draft NECPs that were available. And we looked into different topics. And so for us, it was quite clear, and we were not the only ones. Many have done an analysis that the draft plans were in fact not good enough. The level of ambition needed to be increased on different items. Policies and measures were not sufficiently elaborated, and it was quite clear that with the draft plans we would not only not reach the EU 2030 objectives, but the plans are also not in line with, or the draft plans were not in line with the Paris objectives. So they needed to be much improved. And so this was more or less also the reply from the European Commission. They published recommendations in June on all of these plans. So they gave recommendations to all of the member states on how these plans needed to be improved and where they needed to be improved. So from June onwards, the member states then could have started with further improving their plans, and that is in fact what we now also analyzed. We together with also again our members, we looked until recently how member states had already improved their draft plans, and we tried to see how if they really were implementing the recommendations that the European Commission had issued in June. Of course, to be very clear for us, complying with the recommendations from the European Commission is for us just the minimum. For us, these plans need to go beyond what the European Commission recommended, because we want them to be in line with the Paris objectives. So I will just give you a very quick overview of our analysis, just to be clear. In the coming weeks, these plans will further be developed and adapted. So it's possible that within a couple of days, information that we give here might be outdated because member states are continuing to improve, hopefully, their plans. And so we wanted, by publishing this analysis, to give them a further push so that the plans would be even be better. So on climate ambition, it's quite clear that over the last couple of months there has been quite some I mean, the issue has been a lot in the press, and in politicians have also taken it up, at least at EU level. But it's quite clear that also on climate ambition, member states need to further make changes. Denmark is clearly a country that has committed to increase its greenhouse gas emission reduction targets to 70% for 2030. So they are clearly a country that went beyond what was required or put forward by the European Commission in the recommendations. And so for us, this is clearly also an example for other member states that they need to go beyond the minimum climate targets. On renewable energy, so we looked a bit into the targets that member states have set. So in the draft plans, it was clear that when all the plans were combined, that they would not lead or not result in the 32% renewable energy target. They were not ambitious enough. In the meantime, some member states have increased their renewable energy contribution. On the map, I realized that the text is not so clear, but on the map you can see from the countries that we have assessed that there are still some member states which are much below the minimum benchmark that the European Commission has set, like for instance Poland and Belgium. There are a number of member states that are still analyzing the situation, like Ireland and Czech Republic, and then there are a couple of member states who are now on the benchmark or just beyond the benchmark, like France, Sweden, Italy, and some more. And then there are a few member states who are now beyond the benchmark, like Estonia and Croatia. And Greece recently also announced they would, even though they were already on the benchmark, they would go beyond what is needed. And so our conclusion is that it's that likely the renewable energy contributions, the gap towards the 2030 renewable energy EU target will be smaller, but it's at this moment still difficult to say because we have no final plans yet if the renewable energy target will be met. However, if we look at the energy efficiency contributions, there we have a bigger problem. When the European Commission assessed the plans, the draft plans in June, it was clear that with regards to energy efficiency, there was the gap towards the 2030 energy efficiency target at EU level is much bigger. And as you can see from the maps here, on the left side we have the primary energy consumption, and on the right side we have the final energy consumption. You see that there are still many countries with a red color, meaning that there is no improvement and that they are still much below what would be needed in order to make sure that we that at least all these contributions would be enough to reach the 2030 energy efficiency contributions target. The orange countries have improved their situations but are still below what is actually needed, and the blue ones are the ones that are in fact sufficient and in line with the Commission's recommendations. So, but you see here that we have a clear risk that the NECPs will not be, or that the member states will not come up with energy efficiency contributions which will be sufficient, and we really risk of having a gap to reach the 2030 energy efficiency EU target. We also looked into policies and measures. There it's clear that even though some progress has been made, that there is also much improvement needed. The red color indicates no improvement. The darker yellow color means some improvement, and the light yellow means that there was more improvement, also including new measures, but it's still insufficient. So also here, we really want to give a clear message to the member states that they further need to elaborate the policies and measures, because it's not enough to have ambitious targets. You also need to have clear policies and measures to ensure that you can then at least implement these targets and underpin the targets with regards to renewables and energy efficiency. We did a short analysis on fossil fuel subsidies reporting. Here again, the red means no improvement. Dark yellow means there is some acknowledgement, but there is info lacking, and the light yellow means there is more info, but there is still more information needed, and a clear comprehensive phase out needs to be added. So from the analysis we've done, it's quite clear that more member states have added information in their plans on the fossil fuel subsidies, but we are clearly still lacking clear commitments to phase them out, and there is still a lot of work to be done. On the coal phase out, since the draft plans have been submitted, there is clearly some progress. There are 3 more countries who committed to phasing out coal, and that is Greece, Hungary, and Slovakia. Even though there are more countries which still need to phase out coal, it's quite clear that the vast majority of the remaining coal in 2030 will be located in just 5 member states, and that's Bulgaria, Czech Republic, Germany, Romania, and Poland. So our conclusions, as you will probably have heard already during the presentation, is that there is still much more work to be done. The member states still have 1 more month to ensure higher ambition, but so all member states will need to do additional effort in order to ensure that at least that EU 2030 objectives are met. But as I said before, for us this is just a starting point. We expect that the plans go beyond the 2030 objectives, so that they also meet the objectives of the Paris Agreement, and so that they are in line with the 1.5 global warming. So in terms of, as I said before already, they need to increase their 2030 emission reduction commitments. Also, we expect them to be more ambitious on the 2030 energy targets. They need to define their policies and measures much more. More details are needed. We expect that all countries phase out coal by 2030. And also on fossil fuel subsidies, it's positive that more information is provided, but how to phase out fossil fuel subsidies, that these commitments are still lacking. Just for your information, tomorrow there is the Energy Council where the energy ministers will meet in Brussels, and there is a debate specifically on the NECPs, and of course it will be interesting to hear because member states need to give an update there where they are with regards to the renewable energy and the energy efficiency contributions. So of course we hope to gather some new insights there, and we hope that more countries will come up with more ambitious contributions. So that was it from my side. On this slide you can find a link to the report we made last week, and I would like to thank you for your contribution, for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Verle. Now it's just 11:30, but we had this hiccup in the beginning, so maybe we can wait just a few more minutes and let's see if there are some more questions or someone wants to make another contribution. So if you have something to say, then please write briefly something in the chat, and Anja can or allow you to speak. Do you have a question directly that you want to put into the chat? working yet. Okay, so if no one comes up with anything, then, oh, here Dimitri said, I think the biggest risk at the moment after phase of natural gas is considered as a bridge fuel. Yeah, indeed, Dimitri can Europe is also working on this issue of natural gas, and that too many countries still think that switch from coal to gas is sufficient. So that's something that has to be addressed.
Indeed, I mean, there is a big risk, and I think many NGOs are starting to realize this, and in the coming year, there will definitely be increased capacity, not only in our organization, but also in others, to raise awareness and to see with members and NGOs how we can avoid that we have from coal to gas. That is something that we need to avoid, and how we can go from coal to clean.
You? Anybody else? Another one from Dimitri's. Greece from 5.4 gigawatt goes up to 7 gigawatts. Relative coal to clean is necessary. Yeah, indeed. Okay. Any other contributions with regards to or questions to prosumers or the principles or the NECPs? Well, I don't see anybody else. So then let's close this webinar. Thank you very much for joining. If you have any questions or contributions afterwards, then please write us an email. We will share also the presentations on our website, and also the one from Viale. Thanks, Viale, for coming in, and thank you, Anja, for hosting. Sorry again for the short hiccup at the beginning. We will try to improve it the next time, but I hope it was interesting to you. So thanks very much, and have a nice day. Goodbye.